Welcome back to the Adam Schefter podcast. We now are in the thick of the offseason. We are essentially through free agency, on to pro days and the NFL draft, and the moves are still coming. This past week were more moves than we'll see in a long time, and we're here to break them down today, provide some insight into them, and we're going to do it in our usual fashion with the co-host of the Pat McAfee Show, my friend Ty Schmit, leading the way in the weekly six-pack.
Thank you very much, Schefty. Like you said, it's kind of been, I shouldn't say quiet, but quieter compared to how it was the last couple weeks. But we'll see. There's still a couple, kind of juicy tidbits left on the table there. We'll see if the NFL can kind of steal some of the spotlight from March Madness with that starting. And with that being said, let's get right into topic number one. It's kind of what everyone's waiting on, what everyone's been talking about, what people are probably tired of hearing people talk about. Aaron Rodgers, all of a sudden to Minnesota, has kind of picked up traction, picked up some steam. Is that something or nothing, in your opinion?
Let's start out here, Ty. With Aaron Rodgers, we don't fully know. We can only surmise. But we're talking to a lot of people on a lot of different teams, and here's where we believe, don't know, but here's where we believe the situation currently is at. If Aaron Rodgers had his way, I believe that he would like to sign with the Minnesota Vikings. Do I think that that's happening? Not today, not next week. Do I think it's out of the question? Not entirely. Do I think it's likely? No. But again, it's just lingering out there. It's one of those things that isn't going away. Clearly, he has not made a decision about what he's going to do, where he's going to play, if he's going to play. I think he knows that Minnesota would be an ideal situation. He could go try to beat the Green Bay Packers, which I'm sure he'd like to do. He could go try to continue to own the Chicago Bears as he has in the past. He could go follow the same path that Brett Favre once did, going from Green Bay and finishing up in Minnesota. But I just don't know that it's practical for the Vikings. I think there's a part of it that's appealing because Aaron Rodgers still played, no matter what you say, at a fairly high level last year and probably could step into that team and that offense with those weapons and continue to play at a high level. But let's remember, this is a team that invested the 10th overall pick last year in J.J. McCarthy. The team is behind J.J. McCarthy. It believes in J.J. McCarthy. It thinks that J.J. McCarthy's future. If they bring in Aaron Rodgers, who knows what type of impact and influence that will have on the quarterback who is their future? That would be the question. And while I think it's come up within the Vikings organization, I don't think they've acted with any sense of urgency. I think Pittsburgh, the New York Giants, they've been more anxious to get Aaron Rodgers into their organization and get started. If Aaron Rodgers had wanted to sign with the Steelers or Giants any day over the last couple of weeks, he could have done that. But he has balked at for whatever reason. He has resisted their overtures. He has not given them a clear direction. And I think the belief is the reason he's done that is because in his perfect world, he would get to sign with Minnesota, which doesn't seem to be at this time a viable option. Now, could Minnesota come around at some point in time and say, you know what? JJ's slow to come back from his torn meniscus last year that sidelined him all year. JJ's not making the progress. JJ is not as far along as we thought. Could they then revisit Aaron Rodgers and say, you know what? This guy's going to give us a chance that we don't have right now? Yeah, I guess that could happen. Is it happening today or anytime soon? It doesn't sound that way. And so it's one of those things that I don't believe Aaron Rodgers today will wind up in Minnesota, but I'm not completely ruling it out. It cannot be completely discounted, but I don't think it's the likely outcome at this time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Because you hit on something there that was kind of my train of thought. There is a chance that Minnesota knows that J.J. McCarthy, he's not 100% healthy, or he's going to need maybe a little bit of time with that knee to kind of come back. And the Vikings are built to win now. So it's one of those things where we know how good KOC is. He's done it with quarterback after quarterback after quarterback, but do they, want to run the risk of having maybe a year where they falter a little bit and don't make the playoffs? Now, granted, it's a, rookie quarterback for lack of a better term, because he didn't play all last year. But is there a chance that they know, hey, we're in a window right now? If we can get the Rodgers from week, 13 to 17 or 13 to whatever last year, then maybe that's something worth, running the risk of. And from Rodgers' perspective, I mean, it's the same thing. It's like they give him the best chance to win right away. I mean, the Steelers, obviously, we know that's what they do. They win, they make it to the playoffs. But I think if you want to talk about a team who legitimately has a chance to win a Super Bowl, the Vikings are that team if he goes and plays for them. So what you said makes perfect sense. I don't think we're going to get an answer anytime soon.
That's my guess. Now, sure enough, we may get an answer sooner than we expect. But
True.
Again, Minnesota, I think, would be his ideal destination. And while Pittsburgh and the Giants have their allure, it's not compelling enough that it has caused him to act any sooner. And by the way, maybe he decides, you know what? I don't want to go to the Giants or the Steelers. I'm not gonna play unless the Vikings come along at some point in time. JJ McCarthy went through the torn meniscus. I believe he's physically ready right now. Now, his weight did fluctuate. Like, he lost about 25 pounds last season. And by last count, his weight was back up over 205, 210, somewhere in that range. And so he's put the weight back on. But he's been through his own little adventure here, being away from football for a year, not playing, but he still is the 10th overall pick. He still is a quarterback that they believe in. He still is their future as they know it. And I don't think they're willing to do right now anything to compromise that.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. So it'll be a waiting game there. And for Rodgers, I think while we obviously want him to make a decision, everyone kind of wants him to because it's kind of the last domino to fall. But I can also see it from his perspective because this isn't like going to the Jets. Like, this is the last stop. Whoever he chooses next, if he chooses to play again, that will be the final team he plays with in his career. So do you want to go to the Giants because you know that they're going to, you'll be the starter there? And I don't think that's realistic, So I think it's like, hey, if I can wait this out a little bit and a team like Minnesota eventually is going to say, let's give this a shot, like that would be in his best interest.
And as we tape this Tuesday, March 18th, about 8:45, 9 a.m. Eastern, at some point in time, you wonder if the Steelers and the Giants say, we're not going to wait around anymore. We're going to go sign Russell Wilson or Joe Flacco or Jameis Winston or whatever quarterback it is because we can't wait for an answer. Now, the other part about this is that it is, as we record this, March 18th. It's not like they have a game Friday or next week. There's really no rush other than the fact that all of us and their fans are antsy. Who's playing quarterback? Can we get a decision? Can we get some clarity here? But there really is no time, urgency, or sensitivity to this right now. Now, if this were the week of the draft, it might be different. If this were the week that they're opening their offseason program, okay, maybe that's another issue. But right now, March 18th, there's nothing that is pushing this along to where we need to get a decision any sooner than we all want it.
We'll keep tabs on that and kind of see what comes of that. But I think you're right. I don't know if we're going to be getting a decision or an answer on that anytime soon. Let's move on to topic number 2, Schefty, a former Minnesota quarterback. So Kirk Cousins is staying in Atlanta, apparently. Yeah. What happens with Kirk Cousins in Atlanta? That whole situation is still kind of mind-boggling to me.
Okay, let's give you some insight here. Basically, the Falcons have been unwavering and steadfast in their belief that they are willing to sit on and squat on Kirk Cousins and not move him before they have to. I think Kirk Cousins in a perfect world does not want to be there, would like to be traded. The time passed this past Saturday where the $10 million roster bonus for 2026 became guaranteed when he was on the roster at 4 p.m. Eastern this past Saturday, the 5th day of the new NFL league year. Okay, so he's there. And I think the Falcons are thinking there, okay, if we trade Kirk Cousins, then the acquiring team gets Kirk Cousins and that $10 million roster bonus guarantee. So that tells me that Atlanta is either comfortable with Kirk as its backup, which he doesn't want to be, or it's comfortable with the idea that somebody is going to trade for Kirk Cousins. Now, here's the thing. Once Saturday passed, the time urgency there has been removed for the time being until, in my mind, right after the draft, because Kirk Cousins has a no trade. He's not going to sign off on a no trade until he sees who everybody drafts in April. He went through it in April and got burnt last year when the Falcons took Michael Penix. He's not going to make the same mistake again and sign off on going to a team and see that team then go draft Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders or whoever it is. And Kirk Cousins remains in play. Again, as we tape this, there's an opening in Cleveland at quarterback. There's an opening in Pittsburgh, the New York Giants, Minnesota. Again, how about this? Minnesota lost out on Sam Darnold and Daniel Jones. There's not an obvious solution. What if Minnesota just waits around till after the draft and then somehow figures out a way for Kirk Cousins to get to Minnesota as the backup to J.J. McCarthy? Wouldn't that make some sense, right? And maybe the Vikings can wait it out. The Falcons have been determined not to release him. I think the Falcons want to be able to say, we got something back for this guy that we paid so much to get. So maybe Minnesota says, you know what, it's worth it for us. We'll give you a 6th-round draft pick. They haven't solved the number 2. JJ's coming off the injury. You still don't know what you're going to have. Let's solidify the position with Kirk Cousins. Doesn't that make sense? Doesn't it make sense in Cleveland for Kirk Cousins to be there, especially if they don't get Cam Ward, who I expect to go number 1? Doesn't it make sense for Kirk Cousins to be in New York or Pittsburgh? There's any number of landing spots, but the time urgency has been removed now that the $10 million roster bonus this past Saturday, and it's going to be out there. So we'll wait to see. I still believe I will be highly surprised if Kirk Cousins ever plays another down in Atlanta again. I don't believe he wants to be there. I don't believe he'll be there. But the question is how this plays out and when this unfolds and which team steps forward to make a move for Kirk Cousins.
Okay, so that's good to know because I was kind of operating under the same assumption that he will be traded at some point. Whether
I don't know that, but that's my belief. I just think that he's going to have enough value to somebody, and as soon as there's a team out there that sees that Atlanta is not playing around, and there's a team out there that's willing to part with some kind of late pick or a player, whatever it is, to make it happen, I think there's a trade there to be had. That's what I believe.
Okay, because it does. I mean, and it happens every single year, to maybe 1 or 2 or even 3 teams. Like whether it's a starting quarterback or a backup quarterback, someone is going to get hurt during training camp or the season or something like that. Like you would think that he's still one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the NFL. So you would think that someone will be pressed up and need to do something because it really doesn't. I mean. Not that I think Kirk is the kind of guy who would make a fuss and make things awkward in the locker room and make a big deal out of it, but he's openly stated, hey, I don't want to be here. I still want to play. Like, I just don't know how long you can let that linger when you have a young quarterback starting.
He met with the owner. He made that known to Arthur Blank. I think they know he doesn't want to be there and would like to move on. I think they have invested a lot and feel like it's their right to hold on to him as a commodity. And so I still will maintain I will be surprised if he ever plays it down there again. I'd be surprised if he's there at the start of the season. We just don't know how it's going to play out and when it's going to play out.
Okay, fair enough. So, again, another thing to keep tabs on. Doesn't sound like we're getting any answers with that anytime soon either. So we'll just kind of read the tea leaves on that and see what happens with Kirk Cousins. Let's move on to topic number 3, Schefty. What did free agency tell us about what the Titans are going to do at number 1? They didn't bring in anyone at quarterback, did they? I mean, they didn't talk to anyone. So what are we? I mean, are we thinking this is going to be Cam Ward, kind of a slam dunk now?
Well, they did sign one quarterback. They signed Brandon Allen, the backup quarterback. Okay. So what that tells you is, look, Will Levis, we'd be surprised if he's the starting quarterback for Tennessee. So right now, the Titans quarterbacks, as we tape this, are Will Levis and Brandon Allen. And the fact that they only signed Brandon Allen and not one of these veterans like a Carson Wentz or a Jameis Winston or a Joe Flacco or whoever you want to trot out there in free agency, The fact that they didn't sign a veteran quarterback, an established, experienced, productive veteran quarterback, and they went out and added to their offensive line during free agency. That was the focus, bolstering their offensive line. That tells me that they are more inclined today to go Cam Ward quarterback at number one. I'd be really surprised right now if Cam Ward is not the number one overall pick. And the Titans so far have not entertained any real offers. I still think we're going to get the Cleveland Browns that potentially could try to trade up. I think the New York Giants are going to make a bold, aggressive play at some point to try to trade up. We'll see if there are any other teams that try to trade up to number one. But I think it's becoming more and more apparent that Cam Ward is destined to be the number one pick in this draft, and that the Titans currently have that pick, and I can see them taking Cam Ward. And if they're not taking Cam Ward, then it's in their best interest to say they're taking Cam Ward, because then they can leverage that slot and trade that pick for as much in return as they possibly can get. So more and more conversation about Cam Ward going one. I would say it's likely to the Titans today, but there'll be teams that make pitches to go up. And look, Cam Ward still hasn't had his pro day yet. Titans haven't met with him there. There's still the whole draft process to get through. Players at this time of the year, I always say they're like stocks. One day they're up, another they're down. You never know where they're going to finish up come draft time. But as we sit here today, I believe Cam Ward is tracking to be the number one overall pick. And it looks like the Titans are very serious about potentially taking Cam Ward with the number one overall pick. And now we'll see if there's a team out there that can offer an enticing enough package to get up to number one, or whether the Tennessee Titans waver on that and are willing to move back to go get a Travis Hunter or an Abdul Carter or a Shedeur Sanders or whatever it may be a little bit later in the draft. But as we sit here today, I would say Cam Ward is tracking to be one to Tennessee.
That just makes the most sense. You know, a lot of people are talking about this year's quarterback class and how stacked next year's is, but the Titans, you know, if they were to go sign someone in free agency, like the chances of them getting a marquee quarterback, they're either going to have to really overpay for that guy. So whoever they might get is probably going to be one of those middling, serviceable quarterbacks. But we know how important it is building a roster on a rookie contract. You know, you take him now because there's no guarantee you're going to get the first pick next year and get one of those generational guys. There's just no guarantee.
Well, the two guys that gave hints to Tennessee's direction at one were Brandon Allen and Carson Wentz. Brandon Allen is somebody that has not ever started and produced at a high level in this league. Carson Wentz was a guy that I believe the Titans were kicking around signing. Now, if they had signed Carson Wentz, that might have told me that they were a little bit less inclined to go quarterback at number one, but they didn't sign Carson Wentz, and they bypassed the opportunity to go get Carson Wentz and opted for Brandon Allen. And that decision alone, without speaking to anybody in Tennessee, told me that Cam Ward is more likely than not to wind up being the number one overall pick for the Titans.
And you talked about the stocks and everything. I feel like where we stand right now, Cam Ward is one of the few guys. I mean, we've seen what people have said about Shedeur. He's kind of a roller coaster with how teams allegedly perceive of him, you know, from what we're hearing from anonymous sources and scouts and stuff like that. Cam Ward has kind of been the slam dunk. You know, it seems like as each passing day goes by, people point to something that they like more about this guy, or, you know, his demeanor or his leadership qualities or his, you know, arm talent, all that kind of stuff. We really haven't gotten that. Oh, well, this could be a red flag. This might be why you don't want to take this guy yet.
Not yet. Not yet. Now, things come along in the draft process that you weren't expecting, right? We see players smoking bongs on draft night, or we see arrest reports. Like, there's all kinds of crazy things that happen. You never know. But I would say this. Teams really like Cam Ward more than I realized. And again, I think he's tracking to be the number one pick.
Okay, good to know. So again, you know, we'll keep tabs on that, keep an eye on that as we get closer to the draft in a little over a month here. Let's move on to topic number 4, Schefty. Arguably the biggest news of the weekend. It finally happened in Cincinnati. Bengals signed Jamar Chase. He is now the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL. and maybe, kind of surprising. I mean, I for sure didn't think that this was actually going to get done. They signed T. Higgins
Yeah.
to a massive deal as well. What are the ramifications there in Cincinnati?
Well, there are a lot. I think this is a team that has invested heavily in its offense, clearly. And I think it's also appeased its quarterback, Joe Burrow, because Joe Burrow kept speaking out publicly during the offseason at the Super Bowl, saying that we want these guys back. You don't let your good guys go. And it almost sounded like he was, I don't know, subtly threatening the front office. Like, these are my guys. We better not lose them. And if they had lost them, I wonder what would have been the reaction from Joe Burrow. And I wonder how he would have felt and if it would have been worth tracking his feelings and his future moving forward. But the Bengals get it done, and they're investing a huge amount, way more than any team ever has in wide receivers, which tells you they're going to have to find a way to hit on talent in the draft in the mid to late rounds and have some of these young rookies step in on rookie contracts, because they need those rookie contracts to be able to pay Joe Burrow $55 million, Jamar Chase $40.25 million, T. Higgins $28.75 million a year. No team's ever done anything like this. Now, the cap has risen to levels that it has never been at before, but so have the prices of these Bengals marquee offensive weapons. And so now there's going to be more pressure, I believe, on their front office, their personnel people, to come up with good rookies to fill in roster spots, to be able to absorb these big contracts. And look, I think that it became pretty apparent these deals were going to get done last week. Even on Friday, if you go back and look, I tweeted Friday afternoon about 4 o'clock, the league-wide expectation is that Jamar Chase is going to be the highest paid non-quarterback in football on a deal that pays him between $40.1 and $41 million, and it came in at $40.25. Very predictable. T. Higgins, they were getting that done. And Jamar Chase, here's the other thing that's interesting there. I was told that they had the makings of a deal in place for Jamar Chase at about $37, $38 million per year about a week or two earlier. And then Myles Garrett got his deal done at $40 million a year as the non-quarterback who became the highest paid player in football. And the Bengals already had said that they would make Jamar Chase the highest paid non-quarterback in football history. So even though they had the makings of a deal between 37 and 38, they had to go back to the table and update it after Myles Garrett's deal. So the Browns deal with Garrett cost the Bengals on their deal with Jamar Chase at a later date, which means more money. And if the Bengals had gotten the deal done a year ago, at that time, Nick Bosa was the highest paid non-quarterback in football, 34. Then they could have did it right after Justin Jefferson at 35. Then they could have did it before Myles Garrett, 37, 38. Then they did it after Garrett, 40.25. By waiting, it was another $5-6 million a year on average, which is a player or two.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, a lot of the people we've had on Pat's show have basically said, like, if you know someone is going to be in your future of your organization and they're going to be like a stalwart piece, you're better off paying them early. So stuff like this doesn't happen because they did. I mean, Duke Tobin kind of backed himself into a corner when he said, hey, he's going to be the highest paid non-quarterback. So then as soon as we saw the Myles Garrett deal, we knew, okay, well, you can't say something like that and be like, hey, listen, I know we said that, but $39 million is still a lot of money, right? You'd be happy with that. It's like, no, I'm going to hold you to your word. And it'll be interesting, too, to see. It seems like, we saw what the Bengals defense did last year, and they obviously have question marks there that they're going to have to deal with now as well. We'll see if they can go out and, score 35 to 42 points a game and beat everyone that way. It's interesting that they decided to do this. But like you said, I think, when you got the franchise quarterback, the face of the city, kind of putting your feet to the fire publicly and saying, hey, I want this done. We know what happened with Carson Palmer. You kind of got to keep that guy happy.
And you just made a great point there, Ty, because if they had not gotten this done with Jamar Chase and or T. Higgins, I believe we were looking at the possibility that Joe Burrow would morph into Carson Palmer in the long run. A guy not happy in Cincinnati, a guy who eventually may say, I want out of Cincinnati. If they weren't taking care of his guys in the way he wanted, we don't know the direction this would have gone. But that would be a name that I think could have come into play down the line.
without a doubt. And now we'll see what the Bengals do. Obviously, Trey Hendrickson, that situation is still kind of working itself out. So they still have a lot of questions, but offensively, they're gonna be set for the foreseeable future. Speaking of massive, massive amounts of money, let's move on to topic number 5 of this week's Six Pack Shefty. Derek Stingley just signed a record deal, excuse me, with the Texans. 3-year extension, $90 million with $89 million guaranteed, I believe. What has the reaction across the league been to that?
Well, first of all, we continue to see the title of the highest paid defensive back just continue to get elevated and change hands. It was Patrick Surtain, then it was Jalen Ramsey, then it was J.C. Horn just last week, and now it belongs to Derek Stingley Jr. So we've seen the highest paid defensive back shift 4 different times since the fall, and now Derek Stingley holds that title. Now, I think the reaction that I got across the league is everybody knows how good Derek Stingley Jr. is, 2-time All-Pro last year, but I think they were surprised that Texans did it when he had 2 years left on his deal at the level that he did it. Derek Stingley Jr. completely reset the cornerback market, and that's good news for all the other cornerbacks that are going to get deals. I could tell you the happiest people about the news on Monday about Derek Stingley Jr. getting a deal had to be Sauce Gardner with the New York Jets and Trent McDuffie with the Kansas City Chiefs, who are in the same draft class, who are now contract eligible for their first extensions. And it doesn't mean that they will get the same deal, but it does mean that the price of these cornerbacks and defensive backs has risen dramatically and will only continue to rise. And again, we could go back to Jamar Chase and the Bengals getting it done early. We could go back to the Houston Texans getting the deal done with Stingley, even at a time when they didn't have to. The price on the best players, the star players, only goes up. So you're better off acting sooner. And if you're a player, you want to get it done. You don't want to head into a season and have the threat of an injury hanging over you when there's all this money at stake. So Derek Stingley did the right thing. The Texans did something that I think in the long run is probably smart, but certainly got the eyebrows raised of other teams. Like, why are they doing this now when he had 2 years left? Why weren't they waiting more? I think that was one of the common reactions that I got from some other teams, but I think the Texans said, we have somebody that we know is going to be a huge part of our future. We're going to continue to have him contractually tied to this team and this organization for as long as we can.
Yeah, and like we've been talking about, if you can get him for what they got him for now, I mean, who's to say in 2 years or whatever when he's up, like that might be $15 million more, So if, again, it's one of they know he's going to be there. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday on Pat's show. The amount of guys like him in the NFL not right now, true lockdown corners who can stay on an island, who can, mirror the other team's number one receiver. Like, I feel like we don't have as many of those guys as we used to. So when you do find one of those guys and he's as young as he is, lock him up. I mean, it's just, and D'Amico Ryans obviously is a defensive guy. Everything we've heard about him, he does things the right way. He plays hard. He's a good teammate. So it certainly makes sense that you would do it now just to kind of get ahead of it, I guess, because you don't want to get in a situation like we're seeing with all these other teams where, just because you decided to wait, you're going to end up paying a guy way more and end up potentially screwing yourself over on other points of your roster.
And by the way, the Houston Texans have quietly had a very busy offseason, remaking their offensive line, trading for Christian Kirk, extending Derek Stingley Jr., adding to their defense. I mean, they've made a ton of moves, the Houston Texans, and we talked a lot about them last year with big expectations in the preseason. And even though they made the playoffs, they were a disappointing team last year, and they have acted like it this offseason. They've made a ton of moves and are expecting a lot of results this upcoming season.
Yeah, and we'll see. I mean, maybe it'll be different next year, but you kind of have to do because, 8 wins might win that division, every single year you got. So they're in a pretty primed spot right now, so it certainly makes sense. Let's move on to the sixth and final topic of this week's Six Pack Shefty. Mac Jones finally wound up in San Francisco all these years after all the reports came out that was the guy Kyle Shanahan wanted in the draft when they got Trey Lance. He's, it was kind of, I guess it was always meant to be, maybe. What do you make of that whole situation?
Well, first of all, I do find it to be an incredibly entertaining move. And being that I was one of those guys that reported on that back in the day in 2021 when they made the trade, I will say it again. I'll stand by it. I know for a fact this is true. They made the trade up to number 3 with the idea that they would be able to get Mac Jones because they thought at that point in time that there were other teams that were in on Mac Jones, and they wanted to make sure that they had the ability to get him if that's what they wanted. So the trade was made in 2021 to come up to number 3 overall with the idea that Mac Jones would potentially be the pick. And I think at some point in time, I was on some radio show in San Francisco and I said, yeah, Mac Jones is going to be the pick. And that was early on. And I'm just telling you, that was their thinking. Like we're talking about Cam Ward going number 1. That's how we feel today. The process changes. It evolves. That's where it's at today. I think Cam Ward goes number 1. What it's going to be on April 18th, we'll see. Okay. It's just kind of funny, but the Niners made that trade up with the idea that they were going to take Mac Jones. And then as they analyzed all these quarterbacks and they met with Trey Lance and they put him through some testing, his intelligence level was so off the charts. His emotional intelligence was so off the charts. The way he related to his teammates was so off the charts. The ability to be spontaneous in the football field, make things happen, run around. They became enamored with it so much so that I remember the weekend before the draft being on the phone with 49ers officials, and I could just see that they're going back and forth on all these particular quarterbacks, and they felt like Mac Jones had the potential to be like Drew Brees when they drafted him out of Purdue. They felt like Mac Jones had that kind of potential, but ultimately they were drawn to the athletic ability and intelligence of Trey Lance. Pick did not work. But the trade was made for Mac Jones, who now finally, 4 years later, winds up in San Francisco. And look what the 49ers helped do for Sam Darnold. They gave him a 1-year deal. He left in free agency to go to Minnesota, where he elevated his game even more and parlayed that into the type of contract he got this offseason from the Seattle Seahawks with their starting job. Now, Mac Jones is a smart guy. We've got Brock Purdy there. By the way, we don't even know how Brock Purdy's contract situation is going to turn out. What if Brock Purdy is pissed off and doesn't want to play? Do I think it's going to get there? No. But there are questions about that. Brock Purdy had some injuries before. What if he gets hurt? What if Mac Jones gets to play in Kyle Shanahan's system where the 49ers, we know, believe in him? We know Mac Jones' ability. He went to the Pro Bowl in his rookie year. So Mac Jones, in my mind, did a very smart thing. He put himself in a position to shine this year, to learn another offense, to be around coaches, so that when he becomes a free agent again, he should be even more valuable and that much more seasoned. But I love that this move finally happened 4 years after the fact. Yes, they traded up to take the guy, and yes, they changed their mind. That's allowed to happen in the draft process, Ty. That's exactly what unfolded here with the 49ers and Mac Jones 4 years ago and now today.
Yeah, it's just, kind of cool seeing him finally close the loop on that, because that was, at least of that draft, that was what everyone was talking about, what was going to happen at 3. It was on draft day itself where, odds were changing and all that kind of stuff. Pat got a call from someone who just said, like, hey, it's, it was right before we went live on our show and said, hey, it's not, I don't think it's going to be Mac Jones at 3. And, from there, everything else happened. And like you mentioned, look what happened with Sam Darnold. I think everyone respects Kyle Shanahan as kind of a quarterback whisperer around the league. So Mac Jones gets a year, under his belt to kind of refortify who he is in the NFL. There's we saw who was available this year. Like he'll be a guy who, some team is going to be willing to take a chance on, just like they did with Sam Darnold.
Hey, again, I want to point out things change, right? Friday morning, I mentioned that the Cowboys had, I forget the language I used, made a run or made a push for Cooper Kupp. Last Thursday, the Cowboys reached out about Cooper Kupp, and they were interested. And Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb, the way I understand it, were on the phone with Cooper Kupp, talking to him about the idea of coming to Dallas. And it was floated out there. And then the Cowboys heard the numbers, and they were at numbers that the Cowboys weren't going to get to, which brings Seattle back into play, which leads to Cooper Kupp getting a deal done with the Seahawks. But these things are fluid. Like, things happen. The Cowboys did get in the mix on Cooper Kupp. They found out the price. They were not in the mix. But Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, they wanted Cooper Kupp in the mix. And they had ideas about what it would have been like for him to be a Dallas Cowboy. And again, we talk about the week that was this past week. I'll tell you something else that's interesting. Back in 2016, I believe it was, when Jared Goff was the number 1 overall pick, I used to take a little break. My mental break every day was when I go to the gym, I put my BlackBerry or iPhone in my locker and I go work out for 45 minutes. And it was my way of just having a little bit of mental peace, a little mental break every day. And there was one time that year, roughly in March or April, early April, I'm going to guess, where I put my phone in my locker. I did my 45-minute spin class. I came back and I missed 12 text messages about the Tennessee Titans trading the number 1 pick to the Rams so the Rams could go up and take a quarterback. That turned out to be Jared Goff. It was the last time that I ever worked out without my phone by my side. I've never done it again. I've never left my phone in a locker. I've never been without my phone. Well, the other night, I don't know why I've done this, but I would not leave my ringer on at night because I didn't want to disturb my wife. So I was waiting on the Bengals, had everything written up, had the exact numbers, by the way. I'm waiting for the clearance on this deal. And I dozed off about 10:30. And I wake up about 1:15 and I see all the deals are out there. Now, I'm not telling you that I would have had the story right then first, but I had all the numbers basically to a T, waiting for a sign off, and had a couple of missed calls from a couple of different people. And I think I posted 1:15. It would have been considerably earlier, but just like I made the change back in 2016 that I never would be without my phone during a workout, we've now altered the rules again. The ringer is going to stay on all night from now on, Ty. So we continue to dive deeper and deeper to the point where, I don't know, maybe this will drive us to live in an apartment above a bar on the St. Bonaventure campus one day. But we've given up not having the phone at workouts. We've given up not having the ringer on at night. The ringer is going to be on at night from now on. It's the way it's got to be in this job, right? Like, certain things you just got to do.
Yep, without a doubt. And, I think that's one of those things you kind of eventually just adapt to that, like I'll have the TV on sometimes when my wife's asleep, and I've done that since we've been together pretty much. And now at this point, it's like, I could be watching like an AC/DC concert and she would just sleep right through it. So I think it's one of those things you just eventually, it sucks for a while and then you just adapt to it and it is what it is.
It's funny. My wife likes to sleep with the TV on like all night, and I'm like, put the sleep timer on in 60 minutes, 90 minutes. So if I'm doing that, like, why should it bother her if I leave the ringer on? Like, there might be 2-3 nights in a year where the phone's going to ring at midnight or whatever it may be, right? So it's just the way that it's going to have to be, though, from now on. The ringer's going to be kept on, and it's just part of the job. That's the way it is, right?
That's right. Yeah, nothing you can do about it. And you strike me as the kind of guy who you're not letting someone call 4 or 5 times. Like you're waking up almost as soon as that thing rings. I might be wrong, but that's the vibe that I get.
Well, very rarely have I slept through things. And this past week, there were 3 nights and 3 out of 4 nights I slept through phone calls that were story. 3 out of 4. And I think part of it, frankly, is that I am older. I'm 58, and a 58-year-old man needs a sleep, especially when he's getting up really early and he's going at it hard all day. But I also need to adapt to the changing times, and the ringer's got to be kept on, and that's the way it's going to be. The wife leaves the TV on watching old Seinfeld episodes. I'll leave the ringer on, and it'll just be a little bit noisier in the Schefter household, and the dogs are going to be disturbed as they're laying on the bed. Apologies. That's what everyone's going to have to put up with moving forward. All right, Ty. Hey, great job this week. Hope everything is well in your personal world these days, and want to thank you for the time today. Want to thank my great producer, Dan Stanzik. I want to thank Ben Smith for his help on this production, and you, the listener, for tuning in to another Adam Schefter podcast. Please join us again next week. We'll be back with more information, insight, and whatever's going on with this wacky quarterback carousel leading up to the 2025 NFL Draft in Green Bay, now just over a month away. Until then, have a great week, everybody. Be well and stay safe.